asking the questions mainstream journalists will never ask. This is your Richie Allen Show on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, and triggerwarning.tv.
Our next guest needs very little introduction. He's been on the programme many times before. Top man. He is very well known to you. He's an entrepreneur, very successful man, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, and runs a fantastic annual event in Acapulco called Anarchapulco, hugely popular, where a lot of like-minded people come together with ideas and with plans to, I suppose, to bring down this cabal, or at least to raise awareness of what's really going on. He is none other than the dollar vigilante himself. Let's welcome back Jeff Berwick to the programme. Jeff, welcome back.
Thank you, Richie. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on again. Great to be with you. Loads to talk about today. Trade wars, the European Union. I had Steve Keane, the Professor of Economics from Kingston University, on the programme in the first hour. I'll ask you the question I asked him. Will the United Kingdom ever leave the European Union, Jeff?
Well, as you know, Richie, I've been covering that quite a bit with the Brexit and all that. And I was really shocked when they allowed the vote to go through for Brexit, because virtually every major election, I just call them selections, are completely organized and co-opted to get the results that they want. And I was pretty sure that the powers that shouldn't be, the globalists, whatever you want to call them, did not want Brexit to happen. But when I saw that they allowed it to happen, it made me realize that they were under so much pressure. There was so many people that were really upset about this and really wanted to leave the European Union, that they decided that in order to keep people somewhat pacified, that they would allow the vote to go through. And as soon as that happened, I said, what will probably happen now is that it really won't happen in any respect. It will go on for years and years, and it will never actually happen, but it will actually just pacify enough people for a few years to think that, oh, maybe we do have some power. Maybe our vote means something, which it absolutely doesn't. This is all just a game. All democracy is just a game to make people think that they have some sort of role in all of these things or have some sort of say. It's just for show. But the same people stay in power no matter what happens. And that's what we've seen in the UK. We've seen the prime minister there talking about not wanting to Brexit. We've seen how it's all been slowed down and how this is going to take years and years. So at this point, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I was totally expecting this, that it would not happen easily or overnight or even possibly at all.
Good stuff, Jeff. I should have mentioned that. To be fair to you, you did say that back in 2016. You said you thought they'd allowed it to happen, to then later on, after a couple of years or 3 years, to say, look, we can't leave, or we shouldn't leave. Things have changed. People have a different opinion. Let's have another vote or whatever. But it seems right across Europe, and again, speaking with Steve Keane in the first hour about this, we've seen what's happened in Italy, obviously, in the last few months. Finally, it seems the Liga and Five Star movement in Italy, which are anti-European Union and pro-nationalist parties, seem to be about to form a government there. Hungary, other parts of the continent, we're seeing anti-European Union, pro-nationalist sentiment being expressed. What are they going to do, Jeff? What do you expect that those behind the European Union are going to do to try and put this down, this kind of rising tide of anti-European Union sentiment?
Well, as I mentioned, they do have to at least listen a little bit to what people want, because if literally 90% of people in the UK want to exit from the European Union, and it's very obvious, they can't just force it without doing a number of things. And what they're doing and have been doing is slowing it down bureaucratically. They've been using tons of media. They control the media. All mainstream media is essentially propaganda, especially there in the UK, where you have literally the government's media channel, the BBC, which puts out whatever they want to put out that serves their purposes. So they've been putting out lots of that. I've seen lots of things about how dangerous it would be and how there is so much support for staying in the EU now and all that sort of thing. That's all the propaganda that they can use. But the other part of this whole thing is the people that are in control, the power structure, so, or whatever you want to call it, they really like division and people fighting over things, because as long as you can keep people divided on any topic, and that's what they do, they find almost every topic and try to keep people fighting over it, whether it be anything really, gay marriage or anything at all. They'll try to put out as many things as possible to get enough people fighting, because if people are in a constant state of essentially fighting each other and sort of this fear state that, whoa, what if the other side gets in and they enforce their views using violence through government on me, that they can essentially keep this game going, because no one's really focusing on the real issue, which is who's really in charge and what's really going on. And the fact that we're all slaves, if you're extorted or taxed in any way, you're a slave. And they don't want anyone really ever realizing that. So they'll keep these battles going. This is all meant to keep us all incredibly busy, when really at the end of the day, we're all just human beings and we should just have free trade amongst one another. That's the basic thing that we should have, and we shouldn't be extorted, which is taxes, and we shouldn't be told what to do by people using guns, which is government. And so as long as they can keep everyone in a constant state of division, then they can keep this game going, and they'll play both sides very often. They'll let one side win every now and then. That sort of is what happened with Donald Trump in the U.S. They do this all the time. They put in someone who's really extreme right, like George Bush, who does his family does things like 9/11, and a lot of people get really upset. Oh, he's so right. We need someone really left. And then they bring in Barack Obama, who was essentially raised in a test tube by Henry Kissinger, as far as I can tell. No one actually knows where he's from. No one really saw him until he became president. And then all the right people said, oh my gosh, this guy's too left. We need a right. And so they go, okay, let them win this time. So they give Trump, but nothing actually changes. You look at the U.S. presidency as a great example. There's been no change. George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump have all done the exact same things. There's little things they do that are different, and it's a lot of the, the way they talk and things like that, but everyone's still getting extorted. The IRS is still extorting most people for trillions of dollars per year. The wars continue, despite how much Barack drone bomber talked about peace before he became president and was given the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a total sham. And he had not one day of peace his entire presidency, but because he was left, all of a sudden all the anti-war people went, okay, so it's good bombs. I think he's even got a Netflix special coming out called Bombs of Peace.
He does.
It's so Orwellian. It's unbelievable.
That's right. As far as I understand, Obama and his wife have been commissioned to make films or to make a series by Netflix. It's quite extraordinary. What you said about left versus right, alt-right versus alt-left, and identity politics is absolutely spot on. Let me put you on the spot just for a second. How do you extricate people from that? I'll give you an example, Jeff, while you're thinking about that. We reported on the imprisoning of, let's call him a right-wing activist called Tommy Robinson here in the UK. He used to be a football hooligan. I'm not trying to kick the guy when he's down now. Just trying to remind our listeners who this guy is. And then he tried to rebrand himself as a journalist. Which is laughable. I become very snobbish when people try to call themselves journalists, because I am a journalist, and I'm a real journalist, and it pees me off when activists call it, because activist or activism journalism is an oxymoron anyway. But anyway, this guy Robinson, for me, Robinson is just another version of what you described there. He's just another identity, far right versus far left, and people flock to that in their droves. For whatever reason, they're looking for answers, or because people are saying things that they identify with. And I see that, Jeff, and I've been covering news, politics, geopolitics for the best part of 20 years. And I see this mindset getting worse and worse and worse, rather than people actually see that what you said is 100% right. It's a rigged game. It's ridiculous. It doesn't matter who you vote for. Nothing is going to change. In fact, it's going to get worse. It seems people embed themselves more now than ever with their side. I'm a socialist. I'm a liberal. Oh, I'm a conservative. How do we extricate ourselves from it, Jeff? What do you do to get out of that mindset?
It is very difficult. Essentially, what's happened is generations of brainwashing. It is literally brainwashing of the population into believing in this left-right phony paradigm that keeps people completely divided at all times. If you even look back at the founding of the U.S. with the founding fathers, as cultish as that sounds, that essentially was people trying to get away from the UK, but they just started up their own sort of thing. But even if you look at the founding fathers, not many of them liked democracy at all. In fact, democracy is one of the most worst forms of government there is. Of course, all forms of government are bad, but democracy is especially nefarious because it gives people, you hear people say it all the time. They say, when, for example, if the U.S. bombs Libya for no reason except for to install a central bank, a lot of people in the U.S. will go, "We bombed Libya." No, you didn't. You didn't do anything. Yeah. But they get them to buy in that this is us and we do this and you have a say. Absolutely not. Nothing that any government does for the most part has anything to do with what the people want. And we see that constantly. And people are starting to wake up to that. But yes, they're really pushing as hard as they can now, this left-right thing, because they want everyone in complete chaos, almost Civil War style in the U.S., almost Civil War style, maybe even there in the U.K. I've seen just this week more of the right people getting really angry about what's going on. And, of course, the left, they're always angry about what's going on. So they want this all the time. As far as waking people, and you have to remember, like, they literally from the time you're born, you're being indoctrinated into this cult. It's called a culture, but it's literally a cult, and every country has it. So a lot of people will laugh at North Korea and North Koreans and say, "Oh, I can't believe they believe Lil Kim is some sort of savior and all this sort of thing." Well, if you talk to your average American, they've got Donald Trump there on the wall in the government indoctrination camps, which they call schools, where they do their Pledge of Allegiance every day. And they believe generally the same thing, that the government and the president are here to protect us and save us. It's all a scam. So as far as waking people up, it's very difficult. Obviously, you're talking about deprogramming brainwashed people, and we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions, on Earth who are literally brainwashed. But they're starting to wake up thanks to the internet, thanks to just seeing how this is going. We have enough evidence and information now to show that no matter what it is, left or right, it's bad. We need to get rid of these big governments in general and live peacefully amongst each other and not be enforcing our views upon each other through so-called voting and being in a constant state of division. But we are seeing, like, for me personally, Richie, I run Anarchapulco. We're going into our 5th year next year. It's doubled in size every year. People are waking up to it. And in fact, I don't know if you even know this, but David Icke's speaking next year in 2019. I'm really excited about that.
Really good, and, cool.
Yeah, and he, with David Icke, as you know, the stuff he was talking about 10 or 20 years ago, most people thought he was crazy. Even myself, as awake as I appear to be now, and I'm still waking up, I was like, he seems a little crazy. This is crazy stuff he's talking about. But every year that passes, you see all the stuff that he was talking about being proven as being true. And that's generally happening with sort of liberty movement in general, is people have been listening to us and thinking we're crazy, the more anarchists, the more voluntarists, the people who don't want to force our views on other people, sort of like Jesus, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. They thought we were crazy. But as every year passes and they see how crazy it gets and gets crazier and crazier, some people are starting to wake up and realize maybe the answer isn't voting in government for your views, whether it be left or right. Maybe the answer is to shut down central banks and governments, and then we'll have peace and prosperity on Earth like we've never known it.
Yeah, I love that. I love listening to that. But then I see Trump fans, and I understood why a lot of people. I called myself a bit of a snob earlier, but in reality I'm not. And when people voted for Trump, even though I knew better, which is very arrogant, even though I knew better, I kind of understood, the Clinton crime cartel and everything that went with that, and Obama. And then Trump came along and he appeared to be different and new, and he said some very exciting things. Of course, again, I knew that none of that would ever be followed through on. None of those pledges would ever be honoured. But Trump is the establishment on steroids, and yet you see his fans, they get more and more embedded. Stockholm Syndrome you mentioned. They get more and more embedded. The more he proves that he just is another face of, or another version of the system, with his, Zionist cabal, his neocon cabal around him, John Bolton, attacking Syria, handing the country basically over to Israel in terms of US foreign policy, and yet they still swear by him. And you even get stuff like, Jeff, this is all part of some ploy. You know, this QAnon nonsense. Trump is actually in there. What he's really doing is pretending to be going along with all of this, and he's going to blow it up. Jeff, you have to be absolutely whacked out of your mind to believe that Trump is in there, some sort of MacGyver, some sort of Jason Bourne. It's madness, Jeff. You know, what? Have we become so narcissistic that we can't accept when we're wrong? Geez, I'm wrong all the time. I have no problem saying it. I got that wrong. Sorry about that. Oh, listen, do you remember last month I told you something? I was wrong. What is it with people?
That is just a very basic human nature sort of thing, that a lot of people will just never admit they're wrong, never admit the truth, and cling to whatever it is that they believe to be true for as long as possible. That's sort of what the Matrix movie was about. It essentially said that the people are so inured to the system that they will kill you if they have to stop you from waking them up to what's going on. And that's essentially what you're seeing with the Trump people. The good news is that there was so many Obama people who thought he was going to change the world, and finally black people in the U.S. wouldn't be getting shot by cops anymore. They got shot like 3 times more.
Yeah, worse,
So a lot of the people who moved to becoming sort of voluntarious anarchists and just saying, I don't want anything to do with this system anymore, came from the Obama movement. The one in particular that I can think of is Carrie Wedler. She was called Obama Girl. After a couple of years of Obama, she said, okay, I'm an anarchist now because this wasn't what I thought it was. And so we're going to see the same with Trump. We're already seeing it. I've seen numerous people who say they believe in freedom who really got behind Trump. They were like, look, he says he's going to stop all the wars. He says he's going to investigate and maybe even shut down the Federal Reserve. He said he was going to put Hillary Clinton in jail, which who cares even if he does that? It's just one person out of many, and he probably isn't going to, as we've seen. Literally within, I think the first night when he got elected, someone asked him what he's going to do with Hillary, and he said, oh, well, the Clintons are good friends of mine. They're good people. I wouldn't do anything to hurt them. And that's totally true. The Trump's history, most people don't realize at all because they don't look into anything and they watch the mainstream television programming like it's actual factual information. Trump family has been involved with the Bush family for years. In fact, Donald Trump's uncle was involved in co-opting and taking over Nikola Tesla's technologies with the senior Bush, who was the head of the CIA at the time, way back in the early 20th century. Then Trump his father was a billionaire. I don't know if he was a billionaire, but he's incredibly rich because, $1 billion was worth a lot back 60 years ago. But he was incredibly rich. And if you look at the numbers, Trump has actually lost money from when he was born. He's lost it numerous times. In fact, he should have been bankrupt over and over and over again, but he was actually protected by the system. They never foreclosed on any of his things because they had him already in place to be the next president. They planned these things out decades, if not more, in advance. And you can actually see that. And he was hanging around with the Clintons all the time. But they put on the television programming, and especially on some of these more, alt media sites that were supporting Trump, that, oh, he's an outsider. He's a billionaire whose whole family has been involved with the same people the Clintons and Bushes have been involved in this entire time. They can't see that. He was actually also trained as a Jesuit in school. Jesuits is one of the top sort of secret societies that are involved in all of these control structures. But your average person will cling to it. Oh, no. He's an outsider. He's here to save us. No one will save you from politics or government except for yourself. And the only way to do that is if enough of us detach from the system. But it's essentially like George Carlin said, that people over and over again keep electing billionaires who don't give a damn about you, thinking they're there to save you, the little guy who's not getting by very well after all the Federal Reserve inflation and all the government regulations and taxation and all that sort of a thing. And the fact that people still cling that this one guy is going to save us, and that's a little bit what the whole sort of Jesus thing's about too, is getting enough people to believe that we don't have to do anything, but he's going to come back one day and save us. No, we can only save ourselves, and the only way to save ourselves is to wake up and detach from the system entirely.
Great stuff. Loads of tweets on this, unsurprisingly. By the way, Jeff's website, I'm sure you know, but I'll give it to you anyway, dollarvigilante.com. Check it out. Jeff Berwick is live on the line from Acapulco. Look up an Acapulco as well. Interesting. Good to hear that. You've got David there next year as well. I'm sure there'll be a great lineup of speakers as well as David. Martin Noakes, who's a friend of mine, and an old colleague of mine, tweets, David Icke's suggestion is good. When a person is elected by the voters, they should have to sign a contract to enact the things they promised during their campaign. If they don't, they're gone. Paul Jackson tweets, "Hi Richie, got to say Jeff is spot on with what he is saying here." And Paul Paranoid tweets, I love these Twitter handles. "The problem is, Richie, that people are too emphatic when they declare what they think, and then it's all about losing face. People don't propose ideas, they declare ideology." A couple of years ago, well, more like 3 years ago, I went and spoke very briefly, only for an hour, at a college, a local college in London, Jeff. And I was asking the young men and women there, they were doing a media course, so they were all interested, or at least they claimed they were interested in politics. And I asked them to take a look at party manifestos from successful parties over a period of 15, 20 years. Look at the party manifestos, and they'll be full of things like, when we win, we will build a whole load of we will build a lot of affordable housing. When we win, we'll make everything great. Everybody will come up. We'll lower taxes. We'll make a lot of new jobs. We'll do all of this. And I said, ultimately, none of that happens. But what does happen is a whole lot of stuff that's not on a manifesto. Stuff like giving billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia, billions of dollars to Israel, bombing the shit out of countries in the Middle East and killing millions and millions of people. It should be obvious to people now. You know what's really going on. Les Hewitt tweets, "Richie, I researched how hypnotism works and came to the conclusion that the majority of people are in a trance. They are hypnotized by the governments and mainstream media. I'm not joking. Hypnotism is a very easy thing to do." Gojira tweets, "The United States is lucky they didn't get Don King instead of Trump, only in America. It's funny when you watch any boxing from the 1980s and early 1990s, you get to see all the criminal cabals that Trump and Don King were a part of." Jeff, do you want to come in on any of those comments, any of those tweets there?
Yeah, on the last one, saying how it's essentially just like the boxing game generally was with people like Don King. It's all just a big show. And the funniest part about Donald Trump is he was actually on the World Wrestling Federation as an actor. If you can look him up on imdb.com, he's a reality TV star actor, and that's essentially what they had him in place to do. That's essentially what he is. In fact, most of the top politicians in most countries are essentially actors, the same way that on television, people like, what's his name, Anderson on CNN, Anderson of all names, the name from The Matrix. He was from the CIA. These are all actors. I actually met the White House press corps at Bilderberg, which is actually going on this weekend, by the way. And I'm not going this year, but many great people are, including Dan Dixon, Lee Kordowski, and many others. But I went a couple of years ago, and we somehow got into the Bilderberg Hotel the night before, and the White House press corps was there. And we were talking to them. And after we told them what we do, they said, "Oh, you guys are real journalists." And we said, "Well, what are you?" And they were like, "We're actors. We just read what we're told off the teleprompter." Yeah. And they're not journalists whatsoever. So, you know, but slowly you can see this, Richie, like people are waking up. So just recently, many people started to wake up to how fake the mainstream media is. Even Donald Trump has kind of said that himself about CNN. Of course, he's saying this one's good, that one's not. They're all bad. This is what they do. They always kind of do these things. But we've seen the Sinclair Group in the U.S. put out a thing on NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox. They all read the same script saying, don't pay attention to what you read on the internet. Trust us for your news and that sort of thing. There was literally hundreds of them all saying the same script. So it's all literally just entertainment and script to put out the propaganda message. So people are starting to wake up to that. If you look at the polls in the U.S., the amount of people who actually, the question was something like, do you have trust in what mainstream media news? I think it was less than 15%. So people are waking up. And what they do actually, Richie, and you've said, oh, I've seen all these Trump supporters. I've seen the alt-right come out. I've seen the left. There's a lot of people who still believe in this left-right. It actually isn't. If you look at the amount of people who are voting in the U.S., it's less than 50%. I think it's like 30% or something. So you're talking about most of the people just don't even care. And what they do is whenever there is a rally or event, which they try to help out in many ways, whether it be Soros or others, they try to make it seem like, look, there's this huge movement going on. It's usually like even in the U.S., they had the alt-right one in Charlotte, I believe, in North Carolina, and they made it sound like all the Nazis are taking over the U.S. It was like 30 guys. They want us to believe that there's all this chaos and there's all this struggle when there actually really isn't. There's just a few. It's a small percentage who really care and want this left-right thing. The rest of us mostly just want to be left alone and to live a peaceful and happy life, but they will never put that on the nightly news. They'll always try to find one extreme situation to get everyone all in fear and divisive.
Yeah, we're seeing that here. Just on the turnout, not to be contradicting you unnecessarily, but apparently the turnout in the 2016 presidential election was 58%. Now that's probably, I haven't looked at what it was in 2012, but I'm guessing it probably either slightly fell or only slightly went up, probably because of Trump's participation in it. But I will say this, of those registered to vote, 58% is still quite extraordinary, because you have over 4 in 10 people who've disengaged. You have 4 in 10
people. Yeah, I guess when
people.
I was thinking about less than 50%, I guess I was including like people who aren't 18 and people who can't vote. So yeah, but still, even at the very best, it's about half the people really care.
Amazing, isn't it? I mean, when you think about that, not engaging, just refusing to engage in the system. So on Trump then and trade wars, look, I obviously coming from a trade union background as I do, Jeff, and you know this because we've talked about it before. I know this is absolute bullshit, if I can swear. I know it's bullshit when Trump says, look, I want to protect US industry and all of that. I don't believe it for a minute. But in theory, you know, all things being equal and all things being fair, and if we did live in a free and fair society, we should protect, in our countries, we should protect our steel. Just take that one industry, our steel manufacturers. Why should we see thousands and thousands of our own citizens screwed over by cheap steel being dumped in our country by China or by other European countries, and then to be told that we have to accept it because the European Union says so? So on the face of it, Trump saying, well, look, I want to protect steel workers, it's a good thing, looking at it in black and white, but there's probably something else going on there, Jeff. What do you think is really going on there?
Whenever you talk about issues of trade and doing things like embargoes and things like that, or tariffs and all those sort of things, it essentially comes down to an actual understanding of economics. If you understand economics properly, and it doesn't take going to 4 years of college. In fact, you'll get through 4 years of college and you won't understand anything about economics, but literally you can read it in a couple hours. There's a book, Economics in One Lesson. Essentially, when you understand economics, you understand that the best thing for humanity is for complete free trade, because I'll give you one example, Richie, and always try to break things down from the big global scale, break it down to like even the city level. So for example, in the US, you have Trump saying things like, let's keep these products out. They're hurting us because they're cheaper and they're better made than we can make them here. Imagine every state in the U.S. said that. So you have Idaho making a lot of potatoes, and people in Texas or New Mexico are like, these potatoes are too cheap and we can't compete. Let's stop those potatoes from coming in. What would happen is everyone would say that's ridiculous. That's so crazy. But when you have the boundaries at nation level, then all of a sudden it's okay. It actually makes no sense. So what would happen in that particular case is New Mexico isn't great for growing potatoes as far as I know. So all of a sudden there wouldn't be many potatoes. If there was, they'd be quite expensive and not many people could afford them. So you're actually decreasing the quality of life in a place. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, but we'll have potato jobs. Yeah, but you're destroying the economy in the process bit by bit. So when you keep out steel that can be made cheaper somewhere else, that's actually a really good thing. Anyone who's a consumer out there knows this. They want something as cheap as possible with the best quality possible. In order to do that, you need to be able to get your resources from wherever they might be, that they are best produced in that manner. When you interrupt that process, you essentially make it so you have worse products that are more expensive and generally degrade everyone's life. And you're essentially destroying capital in the process. So over time, everyone becomes poorer and poorer. This is why communism in general turns out to be just everyone starving to death, because you're getting in the way of the market. The market in general works. And so if you say, okay, they're bringing in cheap steel, good. Do you want to build a building and it actually costs 10 times more? Then you can do that by keeping that steel out. But now you've just destroyed a lot of capital. and you're actually poorer in the process. But yes, you'll have a steel job, but not for very long, because over time, as everything else happens like this, the economy goes down and down and down. So
let me put the counter argument there.
Sure.
That was a good explanation of where you're coming from. Let me put the counter argument to you, and it's the obvious one that you've heard before. The problem with this cheap steel being dumped on countries like this country here and the United States is it's produced by people who are paid far less than workers are in this country and in the United States, where living standards are entirely different. That's a huge problem, and you know that.
How is it a problem? A problem for who?
It's a problem for steel manufacturers in the UK and steel manufacturers in the US, because they can't produce at those rates. They can't. So what are they going to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the market telling them that they shouldn't.
Right.
And they should actually put their capital to something that they can do better or cheaper than somewhere else.
So you have the scenario where you have tens of thousands of people possibly put out of work. We've seen it with Redcar Steel in the northeast of the UK. We've seen it in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania over there, put out of work effectively with nothing else to go to, Jeff. It's not as if there are other jobs just there. Or all right, so we failed. We can't produce the steel as cheap as they can in China. So I'll tell you what, we'll leave and we'll go and work somewhere else. There are no other jobs for them. This is the problem, right?
Well, it is a problem for those particular people, absolutely. But this is when you allow the market to work, it's for the best for everyone. So yes, if you look at Detroit in the U.S., because of the massive amount of regulations and taxation and the Federal Reserve destroying the dollar in the U.S., it became really difficult for Detroit to compete with people in Japan and places like that. So people there lost their jobs and they had to go and find another way to live, and many of them did. It's a little uncomfortable. That's the market is not perfect, right? But by trying to keep these things in place, you essentially make everything worse over time to the point where everyone is really poor. You just allow the market to change.
I agree. Hang on a second. You've said you say a lot of things that I agree with, of course, but you've said something there I agree with. You talked about what happened in Detroit, which cost, I would say, not just those working in the plants, but of course, obviously businesses around those plants and communities. You're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs. That wasn't necessarily caused by the fact that people were producing cars cheaper in Europe. You hit the nail on the head. Remind our listeners, why did the city of Detroit go belly up? Why? You mentioned the Federal Reserve and taxation. Go ahead. That's important to make that distinction.
I'm not an expert on the automobile industry, so I probably would get a lot of this wrong. But I know that there was a lot of regulation. That was a big part of what made them not competitive. And of course, Detroit was sort of a democratically bastion, like Democratic Party, and they had all these very regulations and taxes. It essentially put the business, made it very difficult for them to compete. Now, of course, there is still a few automobile companies in the U.S., but it's quite difficult for them to compete. But in general, it's always better to allow this to happen. If you look at the cars today and where they're made, wherever they make them best and people want, that's where they should be made. And whenever you get in the way of that process, you're just causing damage to the economy in general, which makes everyone poorer. If you look at governments and they always talk about free trade agreements, and this is what Brexit and all that's all about, and they say, oh, we need a free trade agreement with these countries. That's not a free trade agreement. A free trade agreement would have one sentence. It would say people in the UK can trade with anyone in the world. That's free trade. What is the actual free trade agreements that they come out with? I think the NAFTA one is like 10 phone books of regulations and tariffs and all sorts of corporates, cronies, payoffs and dividends and all kinds of stuff. And this is what they do. They keep people confused. That's why they never teach economics in school, by the way. They never teach anyone what the money system is. If they actually understood the money system, Henry Ford said in the early 20th century, if people understood the monetary system, there'd be a revolution tomorrow. This is impoverishing all of us. So what they do is they make all these problems and then they say they've got the solution. This is the problem, reaction, solution. They do it in every facet of life, including economics. They say, oh, things are bad here. We're going to come in and save you. We're going to put a tariff on steel. Well, that just hurts the other parts of the economy. And now people have to pay more for houses. So the consumers are going to have to pay more now. So what people need to really realize is just getting rid of all of these structures and just allowing completely free trade across the world, which we now have the complete possibility to do, especially with things like cryptocurrencies. You can send money to China in 10 seconds for basically free, like Bitcoin, and no one can even stop it. So we can have complete commerce across the world now without all of these structures which cause all these problems.
Yeah, and look, I hear that, and we've had this out before. I think you can have protectionism for vital industry like steel. I think you can, without it resulting in the steel becoming, prohibitively expensive for developers. I think you can do that. I think you can subsidise industries as huge as steel, because when you don't, thousands of people are going to be out of work, and there isn't anything else for them to do. Not in this
When you
reality.
subsidize, though, essentially what you're saying is extort the people, tax them to give it to the steel companies so that they can stay in business. Well, you just took people's money in order to allow a few of them to have jobs a little longer to create more expensive and worse quality steel products.
Yeah, but I wouldn't tax the people, of course. You know that. I wouldn't tax them. Look, interestingly...
Well, you said subsidize, so how would you subsidize?
Well, I'll explain that. Interestingly enough, I should have told you that Steve Keane was on the programme in the first hour, because if I had told you that, you might have had a chance to listen in to what he was saying. But I got Steve to acknowledge that, although he disagreed with me about the Central Bank of England, because the UK never joined the single currency, and we still have the pound and we don't have the euro, because it never joined the single currency, Steve said that basically the Central Bank of England is sovereign. And I said, well, I believe to a degree the Central Bank of England is capitalised by the European Central Bank, regardless of the fact that the UK is in the, is not in the euro currency. And he argued with me and said I was wrong. Anyway, fair enough. But ultimately I said, look, you have a scenario where governments still have to borrow, or are borrowing from effectively what is supposed to be their own bank, which is madness. And he put it like this: it's like Richie borrowing from the bank of Richie, or Jeff borrowing from the bank of Jeff, and then having to go and pay it back, and then taxing people into oblivion and austerity in order to pay back a debt even that is absolutely ridiculous. So, if I was given the chance to wave the magic wand tomorrow morning, I wouldn't be subsidising industry like steel by taxing people for it. I wouldn't be doing that at all. I would just be subsidising it, using government money, using government bonds. I know you totally disagree with this, but that's what I would do.
Okay. No, I understand what you're saying. So you're saying you're not going to tax, but you're going to print currency to pay for it. When you do that, you're actually devaluing all the other currency out there, which is actually incredibly detrimental to the economy, because as you print more money, we know this is what happens in every country. As they print more money, the currency becomes less and less of value until the point it becomes worthless, which it has in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela and things like that. So when you say, "Oh, I'll just print out more money," you're actually destroying the economy even more by doing that.
No, I'm not talking about printing more money. This is not quantitative easing at all. This is saying that we're going to pay for the vital infrastructure and public services of a country by not borrowing from these banks and then having to pay it back later on at interest, by issuing it where it's needed. I mean, what's better?
But where do you get it?
Well, the same place that the central banks get it. You invent it out of thin air, don't you?
That's what I said. So you'll be increasing the money supply, which actually is one of the worst things you can do for an economy.
It's never been tried, Jeff.
That's another tax.
But it's never been tried, though.
Banking is actually a scam.
It is a scam. See, you and I agree on 99% of everything. Absolutely right. But what I'm suggesting has never been tried by a democracy in any country, anywhere in the world. Money is taken by governments now from central banks at interest, foisting or imposing a debt on generations of people to come. I'm saying, well, take that same money, but just don't borrow it at debt from a central bank. Again, Jeff borrowing from the bank of Jeff. Use it where it's needed to build social housing, which is affordable housing for people, to build infrastructure, because that, of course, generates jobs and generates money and generates spending in communities and right across cities, and everything comes up. But you're not issuing that money with a debt attached to it. And
Yeah,
it's never
that's
been
fine.
tried,
Like,
right?
the debt part's only one part of it, but the actual increasing the money supply and printing money destroys the currency. So it might look like, for example, if you had the magic wand, and by the way, no one should have the magic wand, but if you had it tomorrow and you came out and you said, okay, we're going to get rid of the central bank, and I'd cheer, and you'd say, okay, now the government's going to print its own money and there'll be no debt attached to it. I would immediately be selling that currency immediately, because it will start to devalue incredibly fast as you print more and more money. This is what hyperinflation is. Money is no different than any other commodity in the marketplace. When there's more of it, it's worth less. When there's less of it, and that's sort of why Bitcoin's gone up a lot, because it's really restricted in its inflation, it's worth more. So you might create a few jobs for maybe even a year or two. This is what happens. This is how they keep people fooled. They'll create jobs by printing money. That's what the quantitative easing and all that is. The printing of money part of it actually makes people think they're richer and the economy booms, but then they realize that the money's actually become devalued and everything starts to fall apart after that, and then the currency becomes worthless very, very fast. So what you're suggesting is just another way of taxing people. Inflation is just another tax, and essentially what it taxes is anyone who currently holds that currency. So if you came in, you said, we're going to spend 10% more than we currently are to build infrastructure or whatever you said that you want to do, 10% more per year, you'd actually be devaluing the currency by 10%. Within 10 years, the currency would be worth essentially zero, and the entire economy would be obliterated and be worse than places like Somalia.
Let me retort. By the way, it's great having Jeff Berwick on. We don't get enough of these discussions on radio these days, sadly. Check out dollarvigilante.com to find out more about Jeff. A very successful entrepreneur and journalist, and you've got to check out Anarcho-Pulco as well, which happens every February, Jeff, isn't it, in Acapulco. There's been some amazing guests there over the years. The point I'm making, and you and I are going to argue this till we're old and grey. We're going to be like the two Muppets in a Muppet Show in the box, Statler and Waldorf. We're going to be arguing about this for years. It's never been tried my way. The way that it happens at the moment results in what? It results in what David Icke has coined the term, and you'll be hearing from David next year, the Hunger Games society. It results in this inequality that you reckon would ultimately disappear with a free market and no government involvement. What we have at the moment is we have everything paid for through government-issued bonds, through central banks, which results in a unsustainable debt being put on people generation after generation, where the government comes back and says, oh, we can't, all this stuff that we paid for, the National Health Service and everything else, we can't afford it, so we've got to tax you more, and we've got to bring in these austerity measures. We've got to cut funding to programs, various programs right across the spectrum. What I'm saying is, I'm not talking about just printing money recklessly and just throwing money into the economy. No, I'm not. I'm saying controlled and sensible money creation with no debt attached to it, where you say, right, we do need 1 million houses, Jeff. This country here, where I'm speaking to you from, we need at least 2 million to 3 million houses for people to be able to afford to buy them, because there are no houses. So, right, I'm going to effectively give the money to the construction industry to do that. That is going to generate hundreds of thousands of jobs. I mean, it literally is. And I'm not going to go back as the government in 2 years' time to the tax-paying public to say, oh, by the way, do you remember all that money that I loaned into existence to give the construction industry? Oh, now you've got to pay it back. It doesn't get paid back. And that's never been tried before, is all I'm saying.
Well, actually, I disagree. It's actually been tried everywhere since 2008, when interest rates essentially went to 0%. So you've had a case of massive money printing over the last 10 years, and interest rates have been near 0%, close enough to zero to just call them zero. In fact, negative interest rates in parts of Europe. And that's on purpose, because they can't allow the interest rate to rise because there's so much debt. So you're essentially, what you've seen in the US and Europe for the last 10 years is your plan. And you can see it just doesn't work. Now, what you're saying is they shouldn't spend it on wars. They should spend it on building houses. Well, that's essentially sort of communism's top-down central planning. And you would actually destroy the real estate industry. You would destroy so many things by doing that. Whereas if you just left it all alone, everything would be fine. Just get rid of the governments and central banks. Everything would be completely fine. If there's not enough places for people to live in England, well, then maybe people should stop living there or having babies.
Do you know why
it's not up to us to.
Do you know where we fundamentally
create money to
build
houses for people.
This is good stuff. This is where you and I fundamentally disagree. I believe that the workers, the people, should control the means of production. You know that this is what I believe.
Oh, you're a communist then?
Yeah, well, no, I'm not going to be labelled communist or socialist or anything.
That's essentially the entire thing about communism.
Well,
the
I might
workers
say,
control the means of production.
But I might say something else in 10 minutes that you might say, well, that's very conservative or that's very right wing. Yes, Jeff, I do. I've always believed that the natural resources of this planet shouldn't be co-opted or taken by any man or any corporation for himself or for the benefit of that corporation. I just don't believe that. I'll never believe it. It doesn't make me a communist. It makes me a realist. As far as I'm concerned, it makes me a humanist more than anything. The workers should control the means of production, I believe. What's wrong with that? That's never been tried anywhere either. Don't say it's been...
That's communism.
Don't say it's been tried. It hasn't been tried in Russia. Never.
It ends in mass murder and death.
Never.
And poverty.
You know it's never been tried anywhere, Jeff.
Sure it has. Because it's been tried in various forms.
Because corruption, selfishness, don't have me to talk about Lenin, Stalin. Don't have me to get into all that. It's never been...
No, I know what you're saying, Len.
It's never been tried, right?
Done it because whenever you have a power structure, whether it be more communist or more capitalist, so more like the Soviet Union or more like the U.S., whenever there's that central planning, it always will become corrupted. It's almost a given. This is what we've talked about. That's what the whole movie, The Lord of the Rings, was about. That ring of power is no one can handle it. And yeah, whenever you have... So if you create your perfect sort of semi-communist system where the workers own the means of production and you're in charge with the magic wand, within a couple of years, you'll be giving out all the deals to all your buddies. This happens naturally.
Not me, Jeff. I'm a saint, not me. But look, I don't entirely disagree with you. It's look, it's grown up stuff. This, you know, there are a lot of our listeners tweeting. A lot of them agree with Jeff. You know, quite a few see where I'm coming from. I'm going to give you the final word. We're nearly out of time. It's great to have these discussions, Jeff. You know, we just don't have them. Check out, and that's not to patronise Jeff, very, very smart, very successful man, Anarcho-Pulco, hugely exciting conference every year in February, coming up for the 5th one. David Icke is going to be there, Jeff says. $vigilante.com. Final word to you, my friend. Remind me why I'm wrong. And if we leave it open, if we leave it up to them, I'm not going to argue, I'm not going to interrupt you. If we leave it up to the markets, why will that work? Final word, 2 minutes, go ahead.
The only thing I would say is that you can believe whatever you want and do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anyone else. So if you put in place a structure where you're in charge of certain things and you're actually extorting people, you say you're going to print the money, but that's a little bit of a different topic. But you can go ahead and do whatever you want as long as I can go ahead and do whatever I want as well. And that's really the key to everything is no person should be, and you agree with this, no people should be owned by other people without their consent. And that's essentially what government is. So yeah, if we had a true free market, I'm sure there'd be pockets of places that do what you do, and we would see if they do well or not. I don't think they do very well because the incentives aren't correct. However, they might do well. Great, awesome. As long as you're not hurting it, but I don't care. Have your sort of semi-communist sort of area, and I'd rather live in a place where people really respected private property and that sort of thing. We'll see how we do. But that would all be so much better than what we have today. So for anyone out there listening that's interested in these sort of topics, we talk about this a lot at our conference in Acapulco, and Acapulco.com, coming up February 14th to 17th in Acapulco, Mexico. And David Icke, Ron Paul, Jez Napolitano, Cynthia McKinney, Doug Casey, so many other people will be there. Great lineup, Jeff. Terrific lineup. $vigilante.com, Anarchopulco.com, is that right? Yes, sir. Love these chats, Jeff. I really do. That's, again, not to butter you up. I look forward to these chats, and I look forward to the next one. Thanks for coming back. My pleasure, Richie. Great work. Terrific guy, Jeff Berwick. And Jeff is on Twitter as well. I'll tweet out a link to his Twitter handle. But if you look for $Vigilante, you'll find him on Twitter as well. Top man.